Donald Trump has scored victories in two further presidential primaries in Michigan and Mississippi. Michigan's being seen as the state which will test the support of blue-collar workers. The Democratic contest there between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, meanwhile, is neck and neck. And I'm joined from Long Beach in California by Peter Matthews, Professor of Political Science at Cypress College. Peter, thank you for joining us. More good news for Trump. Good evening. But just how significant is Michigan for Trump's campaign?
It's very significant. We expected Trump would win, but it's by double-digit margins. He also won in Mississippi by a huge margin. And that's two states swept by him. And, you know, the thing is, I think the interesting outcome with the Sanders and Clinton is something that may surprise a few people, because Sanders was winning smaller states last week. And this time it's a big industrial state, Michigan, which Sanders is winning by about 5 to 6%, 52 to 46. With most of the precincts counted. Not all of them are counted yet, but it's going to, I think, end up in Sanders' column. But tonight's going to be a very interesting night all around, and I think it's very significant that Donald Trump won those two major states, and it puts him in a really leading position, especially since the next couple of primaries, including in Florida, are winner take all. That means that whoever wins by a plurality of the vote, even just as long as it's the largest single number of votes beyond the other two who come in behind him, that first place finisher, first past the post, you call it in Britain, I believe, first past the post, will win all of the delegates from Florida, all of them, not just a portion or proportion of them as has been passed. So it's very interesting that this is, with Trump's two victories, if he wins the next, well, he's already in great position, and if he wins Florida, it's going to really put him, in a position where it'd be hard to catch up with him. And it's creating a big conundrum for the Republican Party leadership. As you know, Mitt Romney went on a nationwide speech the other day trying to put Trump in perspective and warn the Republican voters that Trump can be a real disaster for the party if he is nominated. That's their point of view. But we'll see what the voters say. We saw what they said today. But I'm looking at that Sanders-Clinton race, very interesting as well.
Let's look at Trump, because it's very interesting. He's had a fairly difficult week with the establishment attacking him openly. You have these super PACs coming out with these ads against him, and yet people are still voting for him. And yet he's not someone who is exactly heavy on policy. He's very heavy on rhetoric, heavy on policy. Why, light on policy, excuse me. What's appealing to these people?
Well, the people that he has that are following him are usually lower educated or lower income people who've lost their jobs to export, to outsourcing of jobs. And they were called the Reagan Democrats, many of them, who voted for Reagan, blue-collar workers. And now they're coming back to the Republican Party as Trump Democrats, interestingly enough, because they're resentful. There's a lot of that feeling out there that the middle class has been shafted, and the corporations have taken all the jobs overseas. So Trump is tapping into that, especially when he comes out against free trade agreements such as the TPP, which puts him at an opposite position of most of the Republican Party. They're for free trade. And Trump is actually taking some of Sanders' platform and bringing it together, along with other positions that make him someone who can personally appeal to the lower income, undereducated voters who don't have the high formal education. They're high school graduates, most of them, and they're very resentful. And they see that Trump is a man, they say, this guy's a billionaire, but he speaks our language. He doesn't talk in real long sentences with analytical movements in his words. Instead, it's like very short, punchy lines, and he addresses their personal feelings and comes up with a solution that they can identify with personally. And that's a very dangerous, in some way, talent for someone like him who could take not only the Republican Party off in a different direction, but the country. If he wins, I think Hillary Clinton, if she wins the nomination, will have a very tough time beating Trump. I know Sanders also will have to work very hard to beat Trump, but in the polls, the one-on-one polls, it shows that Sanders beats Trump by 13% and Hillary beats Trump by about 6%. But this is just early polls for November. They're not that predictable. So Trump is the wild card, and he is on a roll, believe me. And everyone has to keep an eye on that, depending on what you want to happen in America.
OK, well, let's look at Clinton and Sanders this evening, and Michigan in particular. Who do you think is going to emerge victorious there?
I think it's going to be Sanders by a small margin. Right now, he's about 5%, 5 points ahead of Clinton, 52 to 46.5. And in the end, when all the precincts come in, I'm going to predict Sanders will probably take it, unless the precincts from Detroit are coming in at the end. I think they're not coming in at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and predict that Sanders will probably take this by a few percent, which will be very, very good for Sanders, and that he was looking for a big win like this. He was winning the smaller states. the rural states, such as the ones that he won this past weekend, Nebraska and Kansas, which was pretty good for him. And Hillary took Louisiana. Now, there's a thing that we have to look at here, everyone, and that is the African American vote has been solidly in Hillary Clinton's column. And that's the main reason, maybe the only reason she's winning so many states, because the black vote, black Americans are voting for her overwhelmingly by 80% to 20%. And Bernie Sanders has been trying to make inroads with them, but hasn't been very successful so far. He's working on it. Let's see what happens.
And if we, well, it's interesting that you say he's been working on getting the African American vote, because he has been involved in the civil rights movement for decades. So well, why isn't he appealing to that demographic?
Matter of fact, he was involved as a student at the University of Chicago in desegregating the housing owned by the university. And he got, in fact, arrested with other African American demonstrators and protesters trying to integrate housing. And he's had a record. He was actually marching with Dr. King on the March on Washington in 1963. And you would think that he should have played that up and let the African American community know that he's been involved with their struggle for a long time. He didn't do that at first. He basically uses, and Bernie Sanders is the type of politician that does not use the personal appeal. He is an issues-oriented politician. He comes out and says, here are the issues, here are the macro level issues, why we don't have any jobs in America anymore is because they've been exported, because of corporations not paying attention to the American worker and globalization. He talks about issues in hopes that those issues will appeal to the voters, and they have in Vermont, because people in Vermont knew him personally. But the United States people, the American people, did not know his personal story, and he didn't really feel that comfortable bringing it out yet. Now he's bringing it out. In the beginning, he didn't. And that's one reason the African American voters, probably one reason they haven't flocked to his side yet. Those numbers are coming up a little bit, though. They're coming up to over 20% now, finally, about 27% in some states. And major African American figures, such as Spike Lee and others, Professor Cornel West, they've endorsed him. And even the pop culture folks like Killer Mike, that brings some of the young people in. So he's bringing in some African American endorsements that could be significant as we go along. I don't think he'll be as successful as Hillary Clinton by this election by June to win the majority of the African American vote, because he only have a short time. If he had more time, he would be able to get, I think, over half their vote eventually, if he had more time. But the primaries are effectively over at the beginning of June, when California votes as the largest state. But the hope that Bernie has is the largest states are going to go for him, and he can bring in more delegates that way.